Bundle up and mark your calendars because Blue Door's signature event is back. Join us on February 22nd for Blue Door's coldest night of the year Richmond Hill fundraising walk sponsored by Home Trust. This is more than just a 2 or 5 kilometer walk. It's a chance to come together and make a difference. You can register, sponsor, volunteer, and fundraise in support of vulnerable individuals experiencing hunger, hurt, and homelessness in your community. For event details, visit cnoy.org/Richmond Hill. Let's change the tune for people in need because it's cold out there. Together, we can make a difference. See you on February 22nd.
You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Michael Braithwaite.
Welcome. How's to another episode of On the Way Home. I love our intro. I don't know, it's an earworm. It gets stuck in my head all day. But yeah, just brilliantly done. And we actually had that created for us by a volunteer. It's awesome. So thank you for that. I am working with the great folks at Blue Door who bring this podcast to you. Check out our work at bluedoor.ca. We do wonderful work in the area of housing, homelessness, poverty reduction, and we do that through helping people from all ages through their housing journey, whether they be families, seniors, youth from the 2S LGBTQ plus community, where we do some cool programming through our inclusion program. INN, like an inclusion, very cool. And as well through our construction social enterprise construct, which is like 550 people into the trades, into jobs that pay a living wage, preventing them from experiencing homelessness, stopping poverty in its tracks. So check out that and much, much more. With the Construct program, we're looking for partners across the country to expand. We can bring you expertise. We don't want to run it. We want you to run Construct and have the impact it's had with us. So you can reach out to me at michael.b@bluedoor.ca. Check out our website again. But listen, if you have a guest idea, you say, even if you don't know of someone, but you thought, here's the subject, I'd love for you to tackle. Here's the panel I'd love for you to have. If you have questions, you have comments, good or bad, please reach out to me at michael.b@bluedoor.ca. I would love to hear from you. That's the only way the show gets better, is with your feedback. So thanks so much for tuning in. Listen, today we have an international guest. We have Bill Rowlands from End Youth Homelessness Cymru. I'm going to say it wrong. It's spelled CYMRU, but I think when Bill says is Camry or camera, but it really is it means Wales. So it's End Youth Homelessness Wales. Wales has done some incredible stuff when it comes to homelessness and youth homelessness. We've had individuals on in the past talking about how they gave teeth to their right to housing through a duty to assist program where they actually had a time limit on how long they could take to find someone housing, which is very, very cool and very unique. So Bill is with End Youth Homelessness Cymru, and so he comes on today. We talk a little bit about his research kind of journey into this work. We talk about some research he did, and they did this research paper on neurodiversity, and it was so cool because they trained up youth with experience, so lived experts. They trained them up and paid them and had them do this. So it was peer-led, which is very, very cool, right? And I think they got different results from that. I really found out some cool stuff around us. We talk about that research and it being peer-led. They also, and we talk about why they're focused on prevention, why prevention matters. And we talk about the upstream program in Wales. We have upstream in Canada. It started with the Geelong Project, of course, in Australia, but it's so cool to see this around the world and how it's a school-based preventative program that kind of gets in there early to put in the supports in place so people don't drop out of school and people don't experience homelessness. We talk about Upstream Wales. We talk about they have a new podcast that's out, focus on youth homelessness prevention. It's a 6-part series, very cool, where they have youth and other experts on talking about the different pieces around youth homelessness and prevention. So you should check that out. He drops that on here. They've done 6 episodes. They'll do more. Then we talk about American program that has come over to Wales. They've been trained on that really gives people like government officials or others, if you really want to get a grasp of youth homelessness, it's an experiential program that puts you through and you come out with a good grasp of that feeling and a great understanding around it. And that was called the Youth Justice Simulation Program. It's an American program, and he talks about, hey, they came over, they were able to do it, implement it, and it's had huge results. That and much, much more. Listen, I always say this, right? We are more alike than we are different. We can learn from around the world. Certainly Canada and Wales I think we've had a wonderful connection there. And I want to give a shout out to Dr. Stephen Gates and Melanie Redmond from Away Home Canada, who linked me to Bill and this work that they're doing. He certainly spoke highly of both of them, sharing prevention seekers throughout the world. It's an incredible podcast with a young and really high energy guy who's doing great work in a different part of the world that we can learn from. Let's go to that conversation now. I think you'll enjoy it as much as I did. Bill, thank you so much for taking the time out of your hectic schedule to join us on the pod today.
Oh, thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's great to see some more collaboration between Wales and Canada. The connections and the links just continue to deepen, so it's great to be here.
Yeah, it's so interesting, I find, is that, I think we're more alike than we are different. We've done numerous, actually, personally, I've taken, with permission, 2 programs from the UK over here. Once the Night Stop, I took that over to 360 Kids when I was there. And then another one was just duplicating vacant homes. That was up in Leeds. They were doing great work with that. But yeah, so I think we did a tour with the Canadian Housing Renewal Association last May. We saw some of the, one of the things that we don't have in Canada that's huge is there's a national, a massive housing corporation, or a couple of them that really push out a ton of affordable housing. And that's something I think a few of us have said we'd like to duplicate. However, one of the things, and we're going to talk about that today, that we're all kind of, late into the game of course, we've been spending years and years reacting. And now all of a sudden we're like, wait a second, we can't really end homelessness if we don't prevent it from happening in the first place. And of course, the further upstream you go, that starts with youth. But before we dive into that, I want to ask you the question we ask all everyone who comes on the podcast, and that is, what does home mean to you?
Thank you. It's an interesting question. And I was thinking this when you sent over the questions, of a skim over of the script, and it was, for someone who works in housing homelessness, it's a bit ironic. You never really stop to think about it. Do you know what I mean? I don't know what other guests have said that previously, but you never really stop to think. So I was discussing with Beth, one of the team in the office, the other day, and I think I kind of got it down to 3 points. I think for me, the first one has got to be safety. You just get in, you can close the door, you can lock the door, and you can just feel safe. Obviously, living in a big city, it's a bit hectic, it's chaos, and then you can just come in, and then from that, you can lock the door, you feel safe, and that gives you that chance to relax. I feel like that ability to be able to relax is important. You need to be able to feel in your own home. You can just come into a space that is calm and works for you, and then you can just allow yourself to wind down, I guess, after a long day working, doing whatever. And then I think the final thing, I think for me, the importance the home offers you, or should offer you, in my opinion, is that sense of community, that sense of rootedness. I think that is a huge thing for me, in that your home should be rooted in where you feel like you have a community around you, whether that's made of friends, family, or just neighbors, or just a real sense of where you've got your sense of belonging. I think that's really key. When I just had a little think about what home meant to me, I think that sense of community was key.
You know what, Bill? It is key. And I'll tell you, sometimes we learn stuff from doing it wrong. And not necessarily wrong, but stuff we didn't think about, right? So we'll have individuals in encampments, and we'll have them, say, at shelter, and then we find them housing. Like, boom, job done, right? So they go into housing. 3 weeks later, they're back at the shelter. You're like, what are you doing back here? And it's that sense of community, right? So when I was at the shelter, I had 25 buddies. The staff were asking how I was. They cared about me. I basically had parents or family.
Yeah.
And then you put me in a housing where I had no one, and the loneliness and that lack of community.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. The community piece, and we learn that now we have workers that integrate and do that. And maybe you want to live with some people. So especially with youth, we do that too, right? So you're so right. Like the sense of community. And then I think it's funny when you say that when you're in the sector, because I've asked this question a couple hundred times now.
Yeah.
and someone turned it on me once, and I was bumbling because I hadn't really thought of it. I'm like, oh, okay, well, but it is really, I always find like it's where you start, where you begin. It's that true self. Every other space in the world is not yours, but
Yeah.
home is that tiny sliver where you're right. When you shut that door and you can actually be your true self, and you let down all your guards, right? Where
Yeah.
you can't do that outside that door, for sure. So let's find out more about you. We always want to find out more about the guests who are joining us, especially our international guests. Tell me a little bit about your journey into the space.
Oh, it's weird to talk about yourself because normally I'm always talking about the work we're doing, and then it's weird. And obviously, when we're doing our podcast, we ask these questions of our guests, but it's weird to have it turned on me. So what I was doing, I was in Cardiff University doing a master's degree in public policy, and I guess I've always really just had this sense of what on earth is going on that we're allowing homelessness to continue to such a level and just such a vast thing, such an accepted part of our society. I think from a young age, I've always questioned that, and it's never really sat right with me. I've always felt there must be a way we can change things. There must be policy drivers, policy levers that can prevent that from happening. I probably wasn't thinking about policy drivers and policy levers when I was 10 years old, but it kind of stayed with me.
It would have been impressive if you had. I mean.
Yeah, no, definitely not. But yeah, so I think as I was kind of going through the masters, we obviously had the dissertation that we had to do, and I really didn't want the research piece to just be a clunky academic piece that was a good piece of research but didn't really go anywhere. I'd always really felt the research should be quite action driven. Not with preempting results, but you would hope to do research and with hope of being able to find things out there and you can push to change. So I decided to focus on homelessness and youth homelessness because it, again, with that prevention focus in mind, I was thinking, oh, well, surely the younger we can stop people becoming homeless for the first time, that will hopefully make sense. And ironically, I actually had a conversation and a coffee with somebody called Hugh Russell. And at the time, he was the director of End Youth Homelessness Cymru. So it's funny how it's come full circle, and now I'm working, and I've been working for YHC for 3 years. So I had a conversation with Hugh, and I was like, where is there a research gap in our understanding across Wales in regards to youth homelessness, either in regards to causes or experiences? And he was saying that looked after children or care experienced children and their kind of increased risk to facing homelessness was something that hadn't been researched. So I did a big piece of research then for the master's dissertation into the pathways and frameworks young people in the care system in Wales took to try and prevent that homelessness, and looked at kind of where the policy implementation was failing. That was a really nice, obviously very upsetting and depressing piece of research to do. And I'm unsure if you've got the same trends in Canada, but it seems quite international. But from that then obviously managed to network quite nicely across the sector, interviewed young people, but also interviewed a lot of people working in the front line, went into a job then off the back of that and networks made, because through that I was then working for one of the homeless shelters, council run, and also working off the back of it for Shelter Cymru as a part-time researcher who one of the bigger kind of lobbying campaigning organizations on homelessness. So kind of took the dissertation, took the masters, took quite a few opportunities off the back of that to continue working in this space, both frontline and more researchy. And then probably about 6 months after graduating, went into a role that was with the Housing Support Network that unfortunately has actually now been defunded, but it was a fantastic role to have as that first step into the door, because it was effectively acting as a middleman between the local authorities, Welsh Government, and the third sector. So in regards to increasing my understanding of the system and how it worked, and also being able to meet and network with people from all over the different parts of the sector and beyond, it was absolutely fantastic. So I was there for 2.5 years, something like that. And then this role came up, and kind of in the previous role, I'd been leading on a lot of the stuff we were doing with regards to youth homelessness. So this just seemed like a natural transition then. And I've been in this post now for just over 3 years, I think.
Well, tell me a little bit about the work that you're doing now, and tell me about the organization. You also, when we were sending some information back and forth, I didn't understand that. Now it's spelled Cymru. The way you say it is Cymru?
Cymru. Oh, that's not too
Cymru.
bad, to be fair. Not a bad attempt at a pronunciation. Yeah, Cymru. You
Now,
sometimes
and
say
that's the
Cymru,
Welsh word
Cymru.
for
Wales.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That for Wales. Okay. So Wales has done a lot of work around, and I know we've had guests on here too. People talk about the right to housing. I know Wales did some
Yeah.
work. And when you say local council, so listeners, so you understand the way in the UK, you're kind of like our borough, like councils or boroughs they're just how things are kind of broken up into little areas that are governed by, right? So in Wales, you gave some teeth to the right to housing because there was the what was it? You could actually take action if you didn't find housing for someone within a certain period of time. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, that's something we'd love to do in Canada, right? And push it. Describe for me right now, what are you seeing? I know in the UK, and I'm going to the UK as a whole, and you could break it down to Wales, but I know in 2010, I remember you were making some significant steps and progress in what we call street homelessness, right? Rough sleeping, that kind of thing. And then over the last so then you have government change, lots of cuts. You talked about a few of them, which resulted in kind of a slide back. It's probably the worst it's ever been. Like Canada right now, we've got high numbers. Talk to me about what you're seeing in Wales and especially around youth.
Unfortunately, you've probably quite a nice summary actually you've given there. It was starting to get better, and then obviously off the back of the previous governments and the time that they spent in office and the amount of cuts were just relentless across all parts of the support system that we need to see work effectively to prevent homelessness. There's obviously now been a big rise. In regards to youth, we've recently did a piece of work where we submitted freedom of information requests to the local councils about the numbers in temporary accommodation. And we had seen, obviously, temporary accommodation being kind of an emergency placement for people facing homelessness to prevent them from rough sleeping while they almost effectively wait to be placed in more long-term accommodation. And those numbers have shot up. Those numbers have shot up big time, both for 16 to 17-year-olds. Those numbers have gone up by 35% since 2016-17 to now, and there's been a 71% increase for 18 to 24-year-olds in terms of the amount of time that they're spending. So not only are the numbers going up, but the amount of time, unsurprisingly, once more people are coming through, the demand is higher. Not only are the numbers on a raw basis going up in terms of people coming through the system, but then the amount of time that young people are spending in temporary accommodation is going up astronomically as well, because the whole system is squeezed. There's too many people. There's people coming through with nowhere to go, and the whole system effectively is just, stuck.
I don't know about you. I think the whole notion sometimes of transitional housing, I think is kind of bullshit in a sense. And I'll tell you why. I think it's something that no client has said, I just need a year or whatever of support, or I need this designated amount of time, for the most part, here and there, right? And I think it's more that we just need to make those spaces available for others, right? So we push people through. But often, I remember, especially in youth homelessness, I remember years ago talking to a group and they said, "Oh, we do transitional in this." And I said, one of the staff who was honest, I said, "Where do they transition to?" And he said, back to the shelter. And so it was this like circle of they weren't going because, and it wasn't through, pointing fingers or someone doing, it was just, as you said, the system. We don't have enough permanent kind of support of affordable housing, right? And that hasn't changed, right? So I think the notion of transitional, it's a quick fix, but it doesn't really work.
Yeah, especially when you transition. Yeah, like you're saying, where do you transition to? You transition to nowhere. There's just no. Unfortunately, the picture of a landscape is just really bleak in Wales. The number of the housing waiting lists for social housing private provider property, is just at an all-time low. The waiting list is huge. The private rented sector is unbelievably unaffordable at the moment. Like the three of us in the team are nearly 30, so Sean, so we're kind of pushing the time we can still pretend to be young ourselves, but the three of us are all in rented accommodation at the moment. And yeah, it's tough. It's tough. It's really, it's unaffordable. the quality isn't great. You've got the dynamic then with the landlord and we go back to what home means, the relationships you have with landlords, housing providers. Can you really feel you've got that safety, you've got that sense of community when you might lose your tenancy in 2 months? It's that's probably a whole other conversation to have. But yeah, there's kind of rambling on a bit, but yeah, it's difficult at the moment in Wales. It's not a great picture in regards to the numbers or the options for young people at all.
Yeah, I mean, so people understand too. For everyone, if your income isn't there, if you have different challenges, credit challenges, it's tough. But for someone, a landlord, the prejudice against youth, when they see a youth come and say, "Am I going to rent too?" And let's face it, most private landlords, it's a business, right? You get a few that are, big hearts will do it, but for most people, it's a side hustle, and they just want the client who can pay 6 months rent in advance to do, like, same thing in Canada, right? So it's a tough go for a young person looking for support. You're doing research, so often when we go to funders or others to say, here's the problem and we think we have a solution, they say, show me the data, right? Always. Right? So your team has recently published a piece of research into neurodiversity in youth homelessness. It was led by a team of peer researchers. What were some of the key findings and learnings from it, and were there any surprises?
I'll talk about the peer research bit as well, because we were really excited by that, and we've had some really nice feedback from that, and we think we've got a really nice way of work now for projects going forward. So we really wanted to, as I kind of touched on, I think at the start, where we were talking about research being action driven. I would consider myself neurotypical. Neurodiversity as a whole kind of topic wasn't something that I really knew too much about before we did this piece of research. So I was very aware of my own limitations of knowledge and expertise, both from lived experience and also academic understanding of the issue. So I was very to be honest, I was quite nervous about doing this piece of research because it wasn't something I knew too much about. So obviously, and with anything, who better to understand it than the people who've had to go through it and who live that every day? So we made the decision that it would be best placed to be a peer research-led piece of work. So as a team, we recruited and trained 4 neurodivergent young people who unfortunately had experience of homelessness. We trained them up in research methods, ethics, methods of conducting research. And then from the outset, they were really involved in setting the parameters of the research. So they set kind of what they wanted to look at in terms of what they wanted to research and what was important to them, but also how they wanted to research it. So we worked with them on creating surveys, running focus groups, running workshops, and they conducted a load of peer research interviews. So with other young people who were in a similar position to them, neurodivergent, and had gone through the homelessness system. So yeah, it was just a really nice piece. And then we worked a lot with some key stakeholders and practitioners, so frontline workers, youth homeless coordinators. And then by the end of the research, we were actually able to bring the young people and the practitioners together once we kind of had the preliminary findings to do a recommendations workshop. So where the young people and the stakeholders, a number who actually were neurodivergent themselves, brought them together to really look at the findings, those initial findings, and then work collaboratively on the recommendations of what we need to do to improve the situation in Wales. In regards to the key findings, we kind of broke the research down into 4 key sections. So we were looking at this is what the young people wanted to explore. We wanted to kind of look at the everyday challenges they face navigating society as a neurodivergent young person in a world that's very much created and dictated by the neurotypical brain, and how those systems are then designed in a way that doesn't tend to be accessible or doesn't have those adjustments built in to be accessible. So we were looking at young people's experiences of education, mental health, employment, relationships with friends, families, peers. Then we kind of narrowed it down to look at the pathways into homelessness, with, unsurprisingly, family breakdown still being the key cause, as we know for all young people. But we found that neurodivergent young people are at heightened risk for a number of reasons. We then looked at their experiences of accessing services. So that kind of that moment of presentation, and then the resulting support or lack of happened after that. So what was it like going to your local authority, going to your council and saying, I'm homeless, I need help? What was that experience like? And then we tried to not make the research too depressing, because it wasn't a particularly good picture. We did end, the final section was on how can we improve things going forward? Because as always, there's pockets of good practice, and I'm sure it'll be the same in Canada. There's pockets of good practice here and there, but it's depressing to know that it's very much still a postcode lottery for young people. So there might be one frontline worker in one local authority who gets it, and then the young people who happen to interact with them get given a better service than the average. But we wanted to look at those recommendations. We wanted to learn from the young people's experiences, because I think the one thing I've learned from this research and all the work we do with young people, because we look to do as much as we can in amplifying the young people's voices and really giving them a chance to tell their stories. Young people are so driven by the motivation of not allowing what happened to them to happen to another young person in the future. All of their involvement with us is just driven by that. Well, I know what happened to me was crap, but hopefully if I can engage with this organization who are lobbying and looking to do research and looking to champion change, it won't have to happen to young people in the future. So it's been that motivation is always a real, just gives you motivation in yourself to keep going, that the young people are really looking to push that change. We really lent on their experiences to put the recommendations together, from kind of a more frontline day-to-day things that need to change in regards to communication examples, sensory adjustments to make things more accessible on that first point of contact, through to the bigger structural changes that need to be made with that prevention lens on, about how we stop the biggest number of young people ever having to come into contact with a homelessness system, because the prevention work has been done upstream.
I love that. Great lead into our next question. Thank you for that. When we talk about upstream, for years, we've seen that most of the work that's done when we're talking about homelessness, youth homelessness, not the exception, it's just reactionary, right? Family breakdown, something's happened, we react to it, and we start trying to, triage whatever's going on. However, we know that if we continue to do this, we'll never be able to end homelessness, because there'll always be new youth coming in. Talk to me a little bit about why, in your mind, why is prevention so important, and why is your focus there? And what are some of the projects you've seen that are, that you're really passionate about? People doing good work.
I think, prevention is just, for me, it's just, we can get into so many different arguments about prevention. We could do another 2 hours, so I'll try and be quite concise. But I think it's just, from a moral point of view, so much research has just shown how damaging to young people's life expectations, opportunities, their life experience, once they come into contact with a homeless system once, it just shows how much more difficult getting over that is. If they're going to have a positive experience moving on, so much research has just shown how much more difficult that is for them once they come into contact. I think in Wales, we found that 48% of young people, 48% of 48% of people who were rough sleeping at the time had first become homeless before the age of 21, and 22 was the average median age for people to first become homeless. So I think for people who maybe don't want to engage the arguments around seeing youth homelessness as distinct, even if you're just solely focused on tackling all homelessness and you don't want to break it down into youth versus older homelessness, whatever, to just stop all homelessness, if we could stop youth homelessness, you're cutting those numbers in half. So it's just without even getting into the moral questions of it, just from a kind of proactive or practical point of view, preventing youth homelessness from happening is going to prevent broader homelessness happening across the board. And then you get into the moral arguments around it, and it just makes perfect sense. Like, why wouldn't we work to prevent young people coming into contact with a homelessness system and give them the best opportunities they can have in life? It doesn't really make any sense to me. We know that young people are at a kind of key developmental period, that kind of psychologically, physically, mentally, socially, those years of kind of 16, 25, you're very much becoming the person that you're going to be for life. Do you know what I mean? They're kind of key, a really key period of your life where you kind of go through adolescence and you really become that person that you are. So why on earth would we want to give somebody the absolute trauma of having to go through a homelessness system on top of that. So then in regards to projects that I think are working particularly well, it was a nice segue because obviously mentioned Upstream. We've got Upstream Cymru in Wales, which is obviously based on the Geelong project. I know that it's being rolled out in Canada as well. And just for the listeners, it's an absolutely fantastic tool, and it is one that obviously when friends are asking, what would be the one thing that you don't work in the sector or whatever, maybe what is the one thing that you would love to see more broadly rolled out? And the Upstream Cymru, the Geelong project, whatever it is in whatever part of the world is now being trialed, this is the one I think that could make a real difference to young people and youth homelessness. It's a survey that is ran universally across schools. So all young people within a school demographic complete the survey, and the one in Wales is 38 questions, I believe, and it kind of goes against broad headings of educational attainment and feelings around education, family relationships, well-being, and there's one more, and it escaped me. That's embarrassing. But broken down into those 4 categories, and then effectively it provides a score of the young person in regards to their likelihood of facing homelessness, either individually or as part of a family unit. And I think what was found in Australia, and the findings are early in Wales, there's only really being rolled out on a trial project, but it's reflecting similar, is that what they found in Australia was 65% of those flagged to be at high risk of homelessness weren't known to any other services. And I think that for me is just a mind-blowing statistic. I think it really flips our understanding of presumptions of risk of facing homelessness. So the young people that kind of, I guess, previously we'd have thought would have been the ones at the back of a class, or maybe not even in school, but the ones at the back of a class playing up, throwing things, being a nuisance, basically. And obviously those young people need support, and there's a lot of things that probably need to be unpicked there and supported there. But I think what it's shown is that for a lot of young people who are going through something in private, in the family home, school is their real safe place, and they keep their head down. They don't want to make a scene. They'll just keep their head down, and then they effectively go through school with no one picking up what they've got going on. And then they get to that crisis point, and then they're like, well, where did that happen? We had no idea. Whereas through this survey, through this tool Upstream, it effectively allows young people to say, things aren't great, I could do a bit of support. They're flagged, and then they're linked either to a family mediation worker who will then go into the family home and try and resolve those problems, whatever that may be. And a lot of the time, that doesn't tend to ever really mention homelessness. It's very much more, well, how do we improve the relationship between the young person and parent, the young person and siblings, the family unit as a whole? Or if the risk is more from an educational disengagement point of view, they'll then be linked up with the worker who will help with that relationship with school and relationship with education and engagement, which in the context of COVID, I'm unsure if it's the same in Canada, but attendance rates are a lot lower now for young people than they were before the pandemic. So yeah, Upstream would be the one. And I kind of rambled on. I get quite excited when I'm talking about Upstream.
It's so listeners, if you understand, we've had Dr. David McKenzie on, who's kind of the grandfather of the Geelong project, and we talk about how almost every young person is in school, especially when they're younger. So why not start there? It goes beyond that kind of, where people were doing reconnect, which is really neat, having workers, but teachers would identify, as Bill has talked about, the kids that they know might be struggling. But there's this other layer of kids, as Bill has said, you have no idea. So this testing, it kind of weeds out those kids. You get them the support they need before they become, it becomes a challenge, and then you have dropouts. So if you drop out, the dropout rates then lead to homelessness, and then so over 11 years in Geelong, like they just showed, they were clearing out youth shelters. It was going great, etc. Bill, one of the challenges, because I'm a big supporter of prevention, obviously, and did some work with that, Raising the Roof in Canada around that, and with Dr. Gates and Melanie from Away Home Canada. And it was a tough sell, especially a few years back, because when you're looking for funding in government they usually have 3-4 years and
Yeah.
they're looking for a re-election, and you're saying you're going to spend now, the payoff might be when you're out of office,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's the longer term, but if you don't do it, having that kind of vision, right? So I always found it was tough. They're due to people like Melanie Redmond, Steve Gates, and so many
Yeah.
others. It's now starting to get into the vocabulary of government.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, wait a
Yeah.
second. Why isn't this getting better? We're throwing. Well, you're not stopping it.
Yeah.
Upstream, and because upstream's not cheap, right? Like if you were to do that in every school, but if you look on the return on investment down the line, you save a ton of money because you don't have people going to the healthcare system, the housing system, all these different systems for sure. So yeah, I love the upstream, and it's so cool to see upstream Wales, upstream Canada, in the States and other places rolling out. You're doing a podcast talking about youth homelessness prevention. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so that's been a really exciting thing that we started, maybe 3 or 4 months ago. It's been something on our radar, but we managed to get it started and get it going. So the 6-episode series is finished. We've recorded all the episodes, which is great. 3 are currently released, and shameless plug, you can get them wherever you get your podcasts. So that's Apple, Spotify, etc. It's called Adrev, the End Youth Homelessness Cymru podcast. And yeah, we just wanted to. We're very aware that we're looking to direct EYHC a little bit more towards young people than maybe where it has been before in the past. I think as when we started, it was very much of the sector for the sector, in that there was some really cool research going on, but it was very much speaking to the sector and not really beyond that. So we've been really conscious of making sure that we are representing not only the kind of just making sure that young people are aware of us and aware that we're speaking for them and trying to involve as many young people as possible. So we thought a podcast would be a way of making, hopefully, our research a little bit more accessible and our work a bit more accessible, because I'm not sure too many 16, 17-year-olds are going to want to sit down and read the 100-page neurodiversity report, but they might want to listen to the podcast. So effectively, we've chosen to focus just for the first series on different issues. So we've done kind of the first episode looked at kind of an introduction to who we are and what we do. Then we've done neurodiversity, the care system and young people going through the care system, LGBTQ+I, youth homelessness, rural homelessness, and the different dynamics between rural and urban homelessness. We've done, oh my word. So an email come through and it's thrown me off completely. We've done introduction, neurodiversity, LGBTQ+, care, rural, and then we've got our roadmap to ending youth homelessness, and we sat down with a young person and we talked kind of about the theoretical 5-part prevention typology we used for the roadmap, and then the young person, Mitchell, who was absolutely unbelievable. And I could recommend one episode you listen to your listeners, listen to the one that will come out at the end of January with Mitchell, because it is a really moving piece, but it will completely reinvigorate you to remain motivated to tackle the issue of youth homelessness, because it was really powerful. And that kind of, Mitchell explains his story against the roadmap and kind of the opportunities for prevention that were missed. But with every episode, we've looked to get experts on, whether they're experts by their career or experts by experience. We've always looked to ensure that there's at least one young person on the podcast so they can amplify their voice, amplify their story, and talk bluntly about what their experience is like, whether they were a care experience young person, an LGBTQ+ young person, neurodivergent young person. And the response has been great. Always a little bit nervous stepping into something new and adding another kind of string to the EYHC bow. But the response has been really positive. And actually, I checked the analytics earlier. The country answer of the country of the second most listens is actually Canada. So a shout out to the away home team, so Melanie, Steve, and Heidi, because I think they've been pushing it for us. So just a nice shout out to them, and thank you to our Canadian listeners.
Like I said, I mean, the work being done there lends itself to Canada as well, right? Like all that, everything I bet you in all those episodes, you're like, yep, same thing. So we can learn from each other. So that's very, very cool. And what are your hopes? You've done 6. You're going to do another? You're going to
I think
keep
so.
it rolling?
Yeah, we really enjoyed it, and the feedback's been great. And we were able, like we were saying, I think before we started, we were able to clip little bits for the social media, so it helps us boost our profile that way. So it's been really positive. So yeah, maybe we could get you on in series 2 and we can swap over and I can be asking the questions.
That would be well, that's terrifying to be on the other end. But of course. So that's so cool. And tell us again, name of the podcast and where people can go. Everywhere you find podcasts, it's called
ADREV, the End Youth Homelessness Cymru podcast.
Okay, very cool. Very cool. Now listen, I think now I'm trying to see if I got this right. You were trained by, you had some Americans come over to train you on a new tool called YEXLS, Youth
Yes.
Justice Simulation. So in broad strokes, tell me about the tool and its outcomes and what are the next steps?
Yeah, and this is, and I'll try and be a bit more coherent than I was around upstream because I ramble on when I get a bit excited about something. But this is, again, something we're so excited about. So it's the Youth Experiential Learning Simulation, Youth Justice Simulation. So we actually got put in contact with Angela and Brian, the two Americans, our American friends who trained us in this through Melanie and Steve. So again, shout out Melanie and Steve. Angela and Brian were coming to Belgium to run the YEXLS at the World Justice Forum back in 2021 or 2. My gauge of the years is a bit thrown with COVID, but it was a couple of years ago. They were coming over. Melanie and Steve put us in contact saying, Wales are doing some really cool stuff around prevention. We think this would click with what you guys are trying to do. Would you be interested in our American colleagues stopping on the way over and running a simulation for you? Didn't know too much about it, kind of took a bit of a punt on it. You said, yeah, sure, why not? They're going to the World Justice Forum. That sounds quite high profile. If we can get them to come here and run it for us on the way, fantastic. So that was the first time a simulation had been ran in Europe. And they came over, again, very kind of stepping into the unknown, shall we say. We didn't know too much about it. It sounded really cool, but rolled the dice and took a chance on it. And to describe the simulation is difficult because I know they run it in Canada a lot, or have run it in Canada, Angela and Brian, and you can't say too much about it because it kind of ruins the experience for prospective attendees. But in effect, the simulation puts participants in the shoes of young people, and it's an immersive simulation, and it kind of allows you the opportunity to reflect on the systems that young people go through when they're navigating that journey. And that's probably all I want to say about what it actually is, because I think to say too much more would give it away. So it's a little bit of a teaser to the listeners. So if you see it, YEXLS, go and do it because it is unbelievable. And I think it's always hard to talk about things that you've been involved in and say how good it is. But because we weren't involved in obviously creating it, we're just involved now in running it, I really can say it is absolutely unbelievable. The feedback we had to the first session and the feedback we've had to every session has been overwhelming. People really, really value from it and they really get a lot from the experience. And yeah, we were then that passion to then try and run it again led to us convincing somehow Angela and Brian to come back to Wales and not only run it again, but train a group of us that EYHC recruited.
So you can do it, yeah.
Yeah, so that we could do it. And I'm not sure what we managed to do because they say every country they go to ask them to train them. But I think the reaction they had in Wales was really positive from the participants in the feedback, in the discussion after. They could kind of clock that what we're doing in Wales really aligns with it. And myself and Dr. Peter Mackey, who I think you've had on the podcast.
Yeah, he's been on the podcast. Yeah, he talked about the duty to assist. Yeah.
Amazing. So yeah, Pete is the vice chair of UHC, really involved. So the two of us formed a nice working relationship with Angela and Brian and managed to convince them somehow to come back and train us to run it. So we had a week-long training session where they were kind of going through each aspect of the simulation, training a team of around 20 of us. We then ran the simulation again for a far larger number of participants at the end of the week. And then individually now as a team of YEXLS facilitators, we've ran 2 this year with plans to run 1 more in this financial year in February, which is really exciting because we've had 2 Welsh Government ministers commit to attend the one in February. So really running the simulation for people who are able to make those massive policy decisions.
Yes.
So
that was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
I would love, I'm like, what a brilliant tool to be.
Yeah.
If you really want to get this, and sometimes it's hard for people to get it, this sounds like it's a game changer, right?
It really is. It really is. And I think what's been so powerful about it is that for people who work on the front line, there's so much to take away. And then for people who work in strategy, there's so much to take away. It's a very individualized experience. So me and you would do it and we both take different things away from it. But there's so much learning, and there's so much learning at different levels. I think that's where the power in the simulation really is that multifaceted takeaways, and also at different levels. There's so much learning that can be taken from there. So yeah, we're over the moon, to be fair, but we've had such a good response to the simulation. And also, well, firstly, that we've been entrusted to run it, and we're fully aware of kind of the responsibility that comes with that, and making sure we stay true to the fidelity, and just also now the opportunities I think we'll have off the back of being able to run it for government ministers in February is really, really exciting.
Very cool. We used to do nothing like this, but when you say about trying to get people to wrap their heads around, when I was at 360 Kids, group focus on youth homelessness in my area, we came up with this thing. There was a group, Covenant House in Canada always does this CEO sleep out. They get a bunch of CEOs together, They have them sleep outside. But I remember in my mind thinking, but that's not the youth experience. Like, that's not really it.
Yeah.
So what we did is we had youth write up, this is what I went through, right? Like for different things. And so the night of, they'd be paired up. They get an envelope and it says, here's what you're doing tonight. Here's $2 and a bus ticket. Good luck. And we'd send them out, and we do it in the coldest part of the Canadian winter because we wanted it to be really hard. And I think for the most part, it's all night, and we have crews following them. You know, our rules, you know, we want people to have experience, not to die.
Yeah.
Right? So that's not the publicity we're looking for. But it was great because we'd have mayors, different people go through this, and the next day, like, holy shit, you know, that wasn't what I thought. I had a lot of judgment, you know, and then we'd have them go to work. And they're like, I'm a mess. I didn't sleep right. I didn't do. So the experience of doing something like that, it really turned a lot of people around. We had a housing minister go through it and just got him fired up. Around youth homelessness, right? It was beautiful too, to say, like, you did it one night, you were falling apart. Imagine doing it all the time. So the experiential part is so critical. So this sounds super, super cool.
Yeah.
Listen, you know, such a pleasure chatting with you. If people want to find out more about the work you're doing, we heard about the pod, but just the work you're doing, where can they go? Where can they see what you're up to?
Probably the easiest place to be the website. So that's www.endyouthhomelessness.cymru, or find us on Instagram and TikTok and X/Blue Sky. We're on all of the social media outlets you could be on, I think, and Facebook. So yeah, check any of those out. Beth, our youth voice and engagement coordinators, really done a great job on kind of boosting our social media presence over the last 6 months. So hopefully there's some content on there that you can enjoy. And then obviously on the website, you can find all of the longer research reports and all of the work we do.
Fantastic. Well, listen, even in talking to you today, I'm already going to reach out to you about a different idea I want to share that's working here. And we've had some great outcomes around. I want to share and get your idea on. But thank you so much for all you're doing in Wales and for lending that over and being able to share with us as Canadians. This is an international podcast as well. We have people from all around the world because we learn from each other. But I know you're a really busy guy, so I want to thank you for taking the time today, for all the work that you do. And anytime you have new things going on you want to share or promote, you're welcome back. Thanks so much, Bill, for joining the podcast today.
Hey, brilliant. Thank you, Michael. It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time on the way home.